Ji Fateh Ji. This is Ravinder Singh joining you from Columbus for a session of Khoj Gurbani. And today it's my privilege to be sharing with you um, some of my journey on the path of Sikhi. And I have to admit that the inspiration has come from
Harvinder, I can't
Ekonkarji.
hear anything from Ravinder Virji. Everybody else I can hear.
Can you hear me?
I can't hear. I can hear Virji.
No, Virji, same here. I can't hear anything from Ravinder Virji.
Can you hear me now?
Ravindra, you're really soft.
The volume is very low.
How about now?
No, it's pretty low.
Really?
Is your headset plugged all the way in, maybe?
Yeah, they are. Maybe I should just remove my headsets.
No, I can hear. Others can check their volume also once, please.
Yeah, I can hear fine, Ravindra Virji.
I can hear everybody else pretty fine, but Ravinder Virji is very low.
Well, I have been feeling kind of low.
Yeah, you're missing your regular energy, Ravindra Virji.
No, it's not regular energy. He's so faint. We can hear everybody else other than him.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Very faint.
I can hear too properly.
Should I hang up and come back in?
Anji, let's try that then.
Okay. Okay, I'm back.
I can hear you very well now. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm good now?
Yes, you gained all your energies.
I don't know where it came from. Okay. So just continuing on where I began, I was saying the inspiration for sharing one's spiritual journey actually has come from Ekonkarji, who's sort of, shown us the way. I believe it's important for us to be able to expose a little bit of ourselves because we tend to protect things that may seem vulnerable, but nonetheless. So thank you, Ekonkarji, for providing the lead in this. And I had to struggle. Actually, I didn't quite know what and how to present this, and then I thought perhaps the best way to do it was to just kind of have a conversation and not go through any formality of preparing slides and the like. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. So with that said, I also want to begin with laying out a couple of assumptions or postulates that have stayed with me all through these years, and it's important to understand where I'm coming from, as far as Sikhi is concerned. And the first one is actually the first one got my attention many years ago when somebody asked me if I was a Sikh by birth, and I don't know what came upon me, but I almost said yes, which was pretty much the reflexive and conditioned answer at the time. But I stopped, I hesitated for a moment, and I said, this is actually, to say yes, I'm a Sikh by birth is somewhat misleading. Because it implies that you're a Sikh. Being a Sikh is simply an accident of birth. So that stayed with me, and I began to really spend a good bit of time thinking about it, even though my response at that time was a standard, yes, I am a Sikh by birth. So I've spent a great deal of time trying to understand the process, and it has led me to believe that the process itself is the end or the goal, if you will, in Sikhi. It is a developmental process that never really ends. It just is a work in progress till the end of your life, as far as I'm concerned. So that is one, underlying postulate that I wanted to share with you. And related to that, I also believe that spiritual journeys are, again, never ending. But they're also more like, like meanderings. I mean, to me, it's like, and I have somewhere mentioned this, that it's like a downward spiral where you sort of keep going down a spiral staircase that leads you into the core of your being. You keep going over and over again, and it's like revisiting the same landscape. You've been there before, but with each downward spiral, you notice things that you missed the previous time, and this process continues again throughout one's life. And I do believe that the truth is already homogenized in us. Bani does tell us that it is homogenized in us like butter and milk and flint in wood. There is a shabad that I can't sort of recall off the top of my head, but it is saying that the implicit knowledge, of our connection with the truth is already embedded in us. It's just a matter of churning it out. So those are the two big sort of assumptions that I have always held, behind anything that I've done, and that has defined my journey. So now coming to just a few worldly facts about myself. My first awareness of Sikhi, as I remember, has come from my father, who was fond of narrating to me the family history, and told me that one of our ancestors became a Khalsa during the time of Guru Gobind Singh himself, quite possibly, maybe at the Vaisakhi. Now, I can't vouch for the veracity of the story or whether how true it was, but the point was that somebody from our family became a Sikh way back when. But nonetheless, whether the story was true or not, I recall that I was about 6 or 7 years old at the time, and I recall it made a very powerful impression on me. This connection with Guru Gobind Singh gave me a special sort of sense of pride. And so that was my first recollection of Sikhi. And then and then from there, this was in Singapore, by the way, where I spent my early childhood. And so Sunday Gurdwara was a weekly ritual. We all had to go through. I dreaded going to the Gurdwara because that meant I had to sit through the Punjabi class, and that felt like it was undeserved punishment. And then, but that pain was eased by the thought of eating jalebis after langar, and that love for jalebis has stayed with me, even though I remember to this day when I reach out for a jalebi at the Gurdwara langar, my father speaks in the background. He used to caution me before we headed for the Gurdwara. He would say to me, "Bahutiyan jalebiyan nahi khani." He says, "You got to control how many jalebis you eat." But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that the early training that I got, even though I disliked it, the uras and the aras, the constant repetition, I think left an impression on me somewhere in my brain, because I came back to it many years later here in the US. And it was because there was this rudimentary knowledge sitting somewhere in my head that enabled me to teach myself Gurmukhi, and that to me opened the doors to this many splendid, wondrous universe of Gurbani. And I've been, swimming in that world ever since. So I think that the Moharni, as they call the repetition, really helped me somewhere. So when I was about, I would say around 11 maybe, or perhaps a little over 10, my father decided to pack me off to Delhi, where my grandparents lived. And his motivation was that I was not a cultural, I was not picking up the culture. He was afraid that I was turning into some sort of a brown Englishman. And I think most of all, he was concerned that I was becoming very argumentative. I would ask him questions, pepper him with all kinds of questions, and drive him nuts. I mean, and he would complain in Punjabi, "Munda Angrezi bahut hi bolda." And so he decided, I think, for other reasons as well, that I might be better off in Delhi. where my grandparents lived. And at the time, I kind of resented the being transported off to Delhi. But I think as I look back, that was perhaps the best thing he could have done for me. Because had it not been Delhi, I don't know that I would have really engaged with Sikhi with any seriousness. And I will tell you, I will share with you some of my early influences that came in Delhi. That's where I began to learn a little bit of spoken Punjabi, because Delhi at the time was very much a Punjabi city. It isn't so much now. And so there, I will touch on two or three people who really influenced my life. And one was a gentleman by the name of Sant Sujan Singh, who was a very well-known exponent of Kirtan and Katha, and had a real powerful, forceful voice. And I'll have to tell you how I stumbled into him. I was bugging my father for a tennis racket. I wanted to play tennis, and I was in school at the time, maybe 13, 14 years old. And my dad, incidentally, owned a sporting goods business. He manufactured sporting goods, and he had agencies with Dunlop and Spalding. So I knew he had tennis rackets, and I wanted a tennis racket. And he said he was, I guess, too lazy to mail one to me at the time. So he directed me to a friend of his in Delhi who also ran a sporting goods business. And he says, well, why don't you just go to him and get the racket? And I did. So I went over to this gentleman's, it was kind of a store that was at the back of his house. So he gave me the tennis racket. And as I came out of the store, there was a narrow lane called a gully, which separated his house from the next house, except that as I got out, I heard the most beautiful kirtan being sung. And it drew me to that house. And there was it was gated, and I could see through the gate. And what I saw was the Guru Granth Sahib in all its splendor, and this gentleman with a long white beard, attending in attendance. And to the right was, I would say, at least 10 odd people in white robes and white turbans, singing kirtan in what was a strange blend of classical and qawwali and folk elements. It was really, really very attractive. And this gentleman, Sant Sujan Singh, he was also had quite a presence, and I was absolutely drawn to him. And I started to go to that Gurdwara every day, and I became friends with him. It was really odd. I mean, he had a huge following, I remember, and people would fight over one another to get darshan of this gentleman, but I didn't know any better. I just approached him one day. I mean, he was walking up the stairs and after Kirtan, and our eyes kind of met, and I greeted him, and he, for some reason, started talking to me. And one of the things he asked me was, actually the first thing he asked me was, do I get up in the morning and do Japji Sahib? And I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, you should start doing that. And presto, I started doing that. Right. So I was totally captivated by this gentleman and his kirtan. And, I stayed with him. My association with him lasted until he died, which was like about a year and a half later, maybe. And so it was during this 2 years or so, or maybe a little less, I can't kind of exactly remember now, but it was during this time that I absorbed much of the ideology, belief, and practice that about Sikhi from him. And I did not know this then, but I realized later in life that it had come from Nirmala antecedents. Okay, his mentor, Sant Sujan Singh's mentor, was a gentleman by the name of Baba Nand Singh, who in the Sikh community is fairly well known as the founder of the Nanak movement. And Babaji, as he was always referred to, was a product of Nirmala schools. And so he had spent time under the tutelage of some well-known Nirmala teachers, and that's where I got my first sort of exposure and training, and I started to practice the nitnem. I getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, doing my nitnem, my Simran before heading off to school. Every opportunity, I would end up at his establishment, which was not very far from my house. So he was one gentleman who really, really made an impression on me, and the other one was quite the opposite, actually. This gentleman had a little, stationery store. It was like attached to the local Gurdwara where we lived. And he would shut the store off every evening, head to Sisganj Gurdwara, and then at about 3 or so in the morning, he would come through the neighborhood singing Gurbani at the top of his voice. And people would rush out of their homes wanting some prasad. Now, that was quite a sight. I mean, I don't see it these days, but when you met him at that moment that he was singing, there was something, he was a glow. I mean, he was just a glow. And he would, of course, distribute prasad and continue to sing. He made a profound impression on me. And the third person who actually that I want to call out was my physics teacher in kind of high school, who was a very prominent wrestler and a yogi rolled into one. He was quite a remarkable man, not from the Sikh tradition. He was a Hindu, but nonetheless, hanging out with him, becoming a wrestler under his tutelage, I started to wrestle. My other sport was squash, but I began to sort of get a sense of the larger, broader Hindu traditions and schools of thought, and tried to kind of relate, them to Sikhi. So that was how things were going, right? This is more on the home front. But in school, on the other hand, right, the school that I was attending, we weren't even allowed to speak in Hindi, let alone Punjabi. We were expected to carry on our daily conversations in English. And we were all, exposed intellectually to the Western intellectual traditions, going back all the way to Plato, Socrates, Shakespeare, what have you. It was a whole different world. So you can imagine the tension that it created in me. I mean, there was the traditional side where authority meant everything, where you did not question authority, where you did as you were told. And then on the other side, you had this tradition that encouraged questioning, where questioning was the key. So I lived with this tension for quite some time. Soon after I came to the US, and that's a long story, which I maybe will not go into here, but I wound up here in the United States and went to college here. But this conflict, this inner conflict, continued in my head. When I was in Delhi, I was living a celibate lifestyle. Even though I went to a school, where we had girls, I would try to sort of avoid them because my Guruji was telling me women are to be avoided. You shouldn't really look at them. They're, temptation embodied, and so on and so forth. The old sort of notion of a woman being a temptress. And I, of course, very dutifully was a celibate, and I would avoid talking to my classmates. They would tease me, but I just chose not to go that way. And then I ended up here in the US. And then all hell broke loose. It was like the dams burst. I just swung the pendulum to the other extreme, I guess. I have to admit that being on campus in the mid to late 70s in the US was just a little too much to resist. I have to confess this. And so the only thing I did in college was play squash competitively and chase skirts. That's all I did, and I admit to that. And as far as Sikhi was concerned, my questioning had reached such a point that I kind of just went away from it for several years, even though I was always curious by nature and I was reading a lot at the time, and I still do. That habit has stayed with me. But as I said, my lifestyle was very, I suppose, promiscuous might be an apt term to use for it. Nothing to be proud of, but that was the way it was. And I think it's part of the journey sometimes. And so that lasted for a little while. And I also then shed my identity because I began to question everything, and I couldn't see the point of wearing a turban, having a beard, and so on. You know, a lot of didactic arguments in my own head. So here I was, without, you know, shed my identity, doing nothing but playing squash, reading, not even attending college, you know, very seriously, but having an absolute ball. Those are the best years of my life in many ways, and I sometimes do long for them, but that's how things were with me. And then I got married. I settled down a bit, got married, and a bit of this Sikhi started to return to me. This was in 1983 when I got married. My wife came from a very conventional, very traditional Sikh household, and she came into the marriage with a copy, with a beer of the Guru Granth Sahib with her. And we were living in a one-bedroom apartment in New York, in Flushing, actually. And for her, the idea of sleeping on a bed with the Guru Granth Sahib present was just unthinkable. So there was no way she was going to sleep on a raised surface. And I was trying to suggest to her that, you know, the Guru wouldn't mind. I mean, she wasn't very happy about that. She actually helped me center a little bit, because being the Sikhini that she is, she just wasn't very impressed, and she put me on notice very early on that I'd better behave myself around the presence of the Guru Granth. And after years of freewheeling, I'll tell you, that was shock therapy. But nonetheless, you know, her devotion rekindled in me feelings that that had gone dormant. So she would read Bani every day. I would hear her, and I wanted to start doing that. And I began to teach myself Gurmukhi and started a practice of daily reading with her help, of course. And that was a good 35 years ago, I would say. And, you know, learning Gurbani was not, and that process continues to this day. So, you know, this is in quick sum my journey, how I have sort of, you know, gone the pendulum from one extreme to the other. And I think in some ways, this is a Hegelian, you know, dialectic that has been going on inside of me. And so the end product is neither the early one nor the one that was freewheeling in his ways, but some sort of a synthesis. And I think what the point I want to make is that as I look back, and I've spoken about attention within, I think that being born a Sikh and becoming a Sikh is in fact a bit of a tension, because it is a gap between a quiet belief and what I think of as authentic faith, you know, between just being given the meaning of things and experiencing them, right? I mean, so when your parents tell you, hey, this is how it is, you just passively internalize it. But becoming a Sikh means you have to actively absorb it. So it's the difference between being handed down cultural scripts and writing one's own story. And I'd like to believe that I'm really writing my own story, because I have tossed aside a lot of what was given to me, even in my days with Sant Sujan Singh, even though they are still very dear to me. I feel that my viewpoint about Sikhi is quite removed from what I had inherited from them. So this journey continues, and I think this tension is always there. and will remain. So where I stand today, how do I feel about Sikhi and how has it impacted my life? I have to tell you, in very, I'm not trying to exaggerate here, but I have had a lifelong love of Guru Nanak, the personality. For some reason, he stands out to me, and I feel exceedingly drawn to him, and in ways that I can't even begin to describe. And so, having him on my side, so to speak, gives me the rapture, if I will, of feeling alive. And I'm just very thankful and very blessed that I have a rebel, as they say in Punjabi, a guide like Guru Nanak. So my current concerns around Sikhi, I will tell you, one is I am very concerned about the legacy of Guru Nanak that is being handed down to us by a particular school of thought that is being popularized around. I think we are doing him a great disservice by lumping him, as part of a bhakti movement or part of this or sant tradition. And I think that's something that I'm working on very seriously, because I think this notion has to be debunked, and should be. So that's a big concern that I have these days. The other big concern at a personal level is that I also believe that Sikhi has to be stripped of its cultural terminology. The message has to be distilled and expressed in more contemporary idiom, which means we have to go back and really look at Gurbani over again. This is the mapping that Ekonkarji talks about all the time, and Gurjit Virji as well. And so I will sum up to say that at a personal level, I am deeply, in my mind, convinced that quantum physics has given us the vocabulary to really begin to understand concepts like Naam and Shabad and Hukum. I think this is definitely, no pun intended, a quantum leap in our understanding of how to really approach Naam. Because over the years, I have found that I haven't found a satisfactory explanation of Naam until I began to engage a little bit with quantum physics. I mean, I'm no physicist. I'm not even a trained scientist of any sort. But I found the explanations, and I found the thoughts of people like, Heisenberg and Feynman and all of these fellows who are talking about non-Newtonian physics. I mean, what they're basically saying is no different from what Guru Nanak is helping us understand, what reality is all about. I mean, I'll just leave you with one example that I've shared with a couple of people. The fact that we talk about life being Maya, meaning an illusion, right? I mean, that is a conventional explanation. So an illusion really means something that appears to be something that it isn't. So the example is, the example that was given was that this whole time, space, gravity, geometry, this geometry of time and space is really not what you see it as. This is coming from quantum physics and neuroscience. And so the example that was given was that of a laptop, the screen of a laptop. This gentleman was presenting on a laptop. He's a neuroscientist, and he says, well, you're looking at me, and then there are icons on this laptop, and one of them, shows the icon of a file. And he says, well, do you think that the file that we are referring to, if I were to go behind the screen, does it look just like that? No. Would you be able to find the file, so to speak, in the way that you see it? No, right? So what he's saying is time, space, geometry is just like that. It is a presentation layer, because nature conceals itself from you, and you are just icons in this time, space, geometry. That is just not your real self. You're being driven from something that is under it, that gives rise to all of this. And to me, that is Naam and Shabad, right? So very fascinating. Just a thought I'm putting out there for you folks. I'm currently driven to try to understand this a little more deeply. But on the whole, I will tell you, I feel every day I look at myself in the mirror and I ask myself, what the hell did I do in my life to fetch so much joy, to fetch so much, to get the company of Guru Nanak, I mean, and to get the company of people like you. So with that, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Anji, thank you, Ravindra, for sharing such a personal journey. Chetandeep Ji, any questions or observations? Chetandeep Ji.
I also have just.
I can't hear you very well.
Hanji Virji, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for sharing your journey and life with us. Really thankful for that. The question that I have for you is, how has your quality of life changed from, let's say, 35 years ago to now? Or in other words, how has your following Sikhi, how has your inner state of mind changed, let's say, from 35 years ago to now?
If I would explain this very simply, 35 years ago, I was full of questions. I had a lot of questions on the spiritual path. I was full of questions and restlessness to a degree. But today, and I don't mean this arrogantly at all. I mean, of course, I have my day-to-day questions, but I feel a great sense of inner calm, if you will. I am less concerned with trying to force an outcome. I'm more receptive to whatever is coming my way. And I think that I have learned, so, one of my big problems in all these years was that because I was exposed to the Nirmalas and the teachings as a kid, which said, remember I talked about celibacy and, not engaging with the world. I had a tough time doing that even here. I was constantly running away from the world, and I felt that all I had to do was my nitname and my meditation, and I was done, and I was just not going to engage. So I've come a full circle on that, okay? And I realized that only when I began to personally engage with the Guru Granth Sahib. What I mean by that is I put aside all of the commentaries I'd read. I put aside all of the, Katha Vachiks I'd heard. And I said, I am going to struggle with this on my own and see what I make out of it. And so today I will tell you that the cliche about living in the moment, I'm learning to do that day by day. And I think that is how it has changed the quality of my life. I am convinced that these primal qualities are woven into the very fabric of the universe. So they are woven into me as well. And I just have to catch them. And I think to some degree, I feel like I may have at least understood them and started to live them. And here's another thing, right? I mean, you may not be, sometimes when you're traveling towards a hill station, Sant Sujan Singh used to tell us, even when you just sort of are a few miles away, Thandiyan Hawawa, the sort of soothing breeze starts to come at you. So it's like that. I mean, you may or may not be there, but you begin to feel a certain calmness, a certain ecstasy at the same time. There are these feelings. I mean, you kind of just know it. I mean, that is not to say I don't have my day-to-day irritants. Of course I do. But just generally speaking, just from an internal centeredness.
Thank you, David.
And thank you, Chetandeep. And Ekamkar ji?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Ravinder Singh Ji, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing. There's like a million subjects in there that are
Yeah.
worth discussing, you know. But
Yeah.
I think my question is, and this is maybe for me right now the most important. I just verify that the path to, like, identity is complex. You know, there's cultural identity, there's familial identity, there's spiritual identity, and we're all of us navigating that all the time. You know, who am I in all this different context. And what you started your presentation with about saying that the spiritual journey is not linear, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we create a culture in Sikhi that can give that message to the youth? Because I think they're getting a message about it being linear, rigid, it's this or that, and it's not. How do we communicate the journey of authentic spiritual experience for the Sikh youth? What do you think about that?
I know exactly what you mean. It is kind of linear in the way it is taught, but I also wonder, how do you make it non-linear for let's say instruction in the Gurdwara? I mean, that to me is quite a bit of a challenge. I think one way is exactly what we are doing as a Sangat, right? We are talking to each other. And hopefully, you know, if enough people talk, and not just talk, but if they have stories to share. I know a lot of people who maybe not that engaged in Sikhi are Sikhs, but, you know, who have similar dissensions within themselves. And so I think just to give them the comfort that it's okay to be going through this pendulum, you know, back and forth, and to be sort of living through the dark night, so to speak. That happens. It's terrifying, but it happens. I don't know if I answered your question. It's a difficult one. I really am not sure how that would work. Maybe by as I said, maybe by distilling the message and presenting it in a different way. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that might be true, because my concern is that the identity of Sikhi is becoming too rigid, and we're losing the youth because they're trying to become something other than what they genuinely are. Like, you had an experience where you've gone through a journey where your connection with the Guru and Sikhi at this point in your life is genuine because you've gone through a process that was authentic to you.
Mm-hmm.
And
mm-hmm.
how do we give the youth permission to go through an authentic journey? You know, that's kind of, I don't think there's an answer, but that's the question that came up.
Yeah, no, that is a fair question and a fair thought, except that as I look back on my journey, and as I look back at the crazy things that I've done in my life, right, versus the more conventional things that my friends have done, right? A lot of my close friends have sort of lived very conventionally and done very conventional things, and I often tell them how bloody boring, you know. I wonder what it was that caused me. It wasn't as if I had planned it this way. It just kind of happened as I look back. And none of this was ever planned. You know, even my meeting with the gentleman I mentioned was accidental. My coming to the US was an accident. I mean, how all of this plays out, I have no clue. But it does happen. So, you know, I suppose we all have our scripts and we are writing our scripts. I don't know. But none of this, I didn't plan it this way. I mean, it just happened. All I know is that I've always been fairly curious about things, and I think of myself as, you know, I love to learn about things and concepts and ideas, but and as I said, I've always felt as if I'm enveloped by the love of Guru Nanak. Where did that come from? I don't know. I didn't manufacture it, but I've always felt it. Ever since I was a kid. By the way, my nickname as a kid at home was Khalsa. All of my neighborhood called me Khalsa.
Wow.
So I don't know where it came from. It wasn't all made up or tried or so I feel blessed.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Ji. Dilpreet Ji.
Anji, thank you, Virji, for sharing. I have two questions. I think first one is a quick one, and second one might be extension of what Ekunkarji is asking. So the first one is, I always wondered, I have heard that Sant Sujan Singh was very good with Kirtan. Was he doing the Kirtan from Gurbani or the Gurbani Kirtan, or he was using this whatever everybody else does in the Sant Samaj, like the Kachi Bani Kirtan? So what type of Kirtan he used to do?
Oh, I think Sant Sujan Singh broke many of the rules, okay, by which we think we live. I will tell you that he broke a lot of the rules. Although at the time that I was going there, I obviously wasn't aware. I mean, as I look back and if I had to assess his life, for instance, he had a huge picture of Baba Nand Singh placed, at the top of the hall. And this is in retrospect, because I learned this later, that a lot of the Sikhs in Delhi actually protested. They went to him and said, "You can't do this. I mean, you can't place a picture like that in the hall where the Guru Granth Sahib is." And he said, "Well," he said, he meant everything to me, and he's the one who connected me with the Guru. And as far as I'm concerned, that's enough reason for me to do this. And it wasn't a regular Gurdwara, so he had that power. I mean, it was his house. So it is like I can do whatever the hell I want to in my own home, right? So yes, so he did that. And then as far as Kirtan is concerned, absolutely. He would sing some regular kavalis that are not Bani. And at the time, I rather enjoyed them, and I enjoy them even now.
Okay.
And in fact, I'll share them with you. Maybe you'll enjoy them too.
Yes, I have enjoyed them a lot.
Yeah, yeah. No, he was certainly not conventional.
Okay.
And
So
what was the second question?
my second question is, so I have always struggled with this because if you get the influence of this Nirmalas or Sant Samaj, the way they prepare you, the way they teach things, and then there is always a debate that is the right way to get the kids started. But on the other side, the people like Richard Dawkins and these guys will say that that is polluting the mind of the kids and it is very hard for them to come out of it, and only some can come out and most will struggle not to come out of it. So any thoughts on that, as you came out of it as you explained, right?
Well, I wouldn't say so. Here's my thought on this. Right, I'm not a biologist, and I don't necessarily agree entirely with Richard Dawkins. But here's what I think. So you have your biological DNA, which are the guardrails that kind of limit what you can do physically, right? So you can't fly even if you want to. So there are limits. Your genetics sets these limits, and within that you function. Similarly, I personally believe that stacked on top of in fact, Richard Dawkins speaks in the same tone, is stacked your cultural DNA. Okay, and in terms of Gurbani, the way I think, I mean, this is entirely my thinking. I could be way off the mark. I see how as being your sense of your physical identity. Your root. It comes to you even when you are born. You're aware, but then the meh part of it is stacked on as cultural DNA. That meh comes from your environment and your education. Okay, your teachers, your parents, your environment, your experiences that form around you. That becomes your cultural DNA. And yes, you're exposed to it. So the answer is, can kids come out of it? Maybe not entirely. Is it desirable to come out of it entirely? Maybe not. It's like this. So if you want to swim into the deeper sort of regions of an ocean, sometimes it's good to be anchored right somewhere. This gives you location of where you're coming from. I personally think that when I think of things, for example, I kind of know where I'm coming from. I'm very particular in my personal life when I'm thinking about these things. I've always questioned my own thinking. That's one thing that has always stayed with me. I have never accepted even my own thinking. I've always questioned it. And I think that is one reason, perhaps, that I can hold on to a lot of different viewpoints without feeling crazy. My position always is in the realm of spirituality. I really know nothing. I'm just having an experience and I'm blessed for it. So if you were not to do some sort of training, children will get trained culturally regardless, right? I mean, it is either this training or that training or some training.
Okay. Thank you, Virji.
Thank you, Virji. Eileen?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you so much, Virji. I really just I love the authenticity and reflection that you shared of that really sort of showed you know, kind of that self-awareness and you know, kind of looking inward was very much apparent in your description. You know, that means a lot to me in terms of my own journey. So I just really appreciated that. My question is, you know, on the questioning path, or on the battle that you described, sort of that has been present, or there's still, I guess, is some questioning that you do as part of your process, but not overwhelming. What do you think is the right? How do you level set that questioning and not kind of go down the rabbit hole, or how does the questioning serve you differently now? Because, you know, I guess what I'm getting at is that, you know, you could question away a lot of discipline. You could question away a lot of, you know, faith almost. You could just, if you take that to kind of a logical process extreme, then I think you can, you know, you can kind of get kind of further away from your center. And I was just wondering how you have found that that aspect to be kind of tamed.
So I think one of the discoveries along the way, Eileen, has been that part of I think our problem stems from the fact that we are living in our heads, in our thoughts all the time, that we are really cut off from our deeper centers. And I think that is what Guru Nanak is also telling us in some way, that you need to sort of turn inwards and live at another level, because that's where reality is more authentic. So I have in some ways grasped that. And I'll give you an example, perhaps that'll explain. There is, for instance, the moment-to-moment feeling that I have about being alive, right? I mean, we all feel a certain way. I mean, you get up in the morning, you're feeling a certain way. So that's my nervous system engaging with the universe at large, right? All these signals that are coming to me, and I'm kind of feeling. So I have, in some ways, I try to cultivate an awareness of that, because I know that when so that's my experience. Intellectually, I think that the intellect should be divorced from that feeling most of the time and be confined to the task that it is designed for, right? So we do a lot of discussion and dialogue, and this requires the intellect. So otherwise we wouldn't have a conversation. We're exchanging thoughts and so on. But I think it has really very little or nothing to do with the actual experience that I'm talking about. It has really nothing to do with it. The message of Guru Nanak, for example, is very simple to understand. It's just a matter of living it. So I feel like we need to create the separation. So I love this dialogue, for example. I mean, and I love to sort of explore Gurbani over and over and over again, even though one side of me says, why the devil are you doing this? You already know what it means, but it's engaging. It's engaging my thought. And, you know, sometimes there are insights. So I think that separation, not living in the, sort of trying to understand what the limits of thought what the limits of thought is, perhaps helps. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I think you definitely are. I think what you're saying, if I was to kind of absorb it, it sounds kind of like you're saying you reach the capacity, or the limitations of that part, of that component.
Yeah.
So it doesn't overwhelm the rest.
Yeah,
and trying to solve everything logically.
Exactly. I have, at some point you just have to discard logic. Because that is where we run in, because all of our training is discursive and cognitive, right? I mean, it is deep training, and it is to undo that training, I think, is the key. Yeah.
No, thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ripudamavirji.
Thank you very much for actually sharing your spiritual journey, Virji. I think so. You guys are very brave. You're able to do that in such a public forum. Really appreciate it. I actually don't have any questions. It was just very, very nice.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you, Ripadaman.
Thank you, Virji. Aji, Gurjeet Virji. Gurjeet Virji.
Hanji Virji.
Hanji Virji, Vai Khalsa. Hanji, Virji, any questions or observations?
Thank you for hearing. I'll just ask one simple question.
Your questions are never simple.
Just you would have come across so many, we have so many sects within our, faith. So you think they're really very different to each other as per your experience, or they talk very similar sorts of ground? Because you have come across, you said Nirmalas, and then there will be a few others. So you find they are really different to each other, or they are quite on a similar ground?
My personal experience, to give you a very short answer, is that I don't think they're very different from one another. They might differ, on a point here or there. I think their larger difference also stems from personalities, because a lot of these sects are personality based. So there is that element that also comes into, but I think the interpretations are not that far off.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Virji. Anji, Gurdeep uncle, Montreal.
Ji, do you hear me?
Ji.
Anji, I'm very much convinced of what Ravinder Virji said. And everything, but I was thinking is based on Gurbani. Gurbani says, which may answer to Gurjeet Virji also, but I'm not sure. Gurbani says, Manamukh syo kare dosti, sukh ki puche mit. Gurmukh syo kare dosti, sadgur syo lai chit. This is a very important factor. When we make friends somebody, Manmukh, you all know what's Manmukh, you can never be happy in your life. But on the other hand, as he met Sant Sujan Singh Ji, which was a Gurmukh, you have to meet, you have to be friendship with the Gurmukh, but your heart and soul should be to the divine God, which is Guru Nanak, Guru Gobind Singh, Guru Granth Sahib. And I think you did perfect. Whatever happened to you, very normal. And by default, we can't control our mind. If we read those, there are 10 parts of the life mentioned in Guru Granth Sahib, it's very hard to control ourselves, but we have to get a grace from somewhere which will control ourselves and bring us back on the track, and which will make us more motivated to explore what we are enjoying already or what has been helping us in the past life. I don't know, I have very much similar experience. I am living here 45 years, more than 45. Since I left India, I was 2 years in Middle East and Europe, and I was not even married. The mind is a devil. It has to make us run around. But my only little question to you, did you keep your, sorry, it's not very personal, but if you don't mind, answer me. If you don't feel, don't.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
kept your turban always? Turban and beard?
No. I mentioned that I removed my turban. Actually, I was in my second semester here, maybe.
Okay.
So I was without, I didn't wear a turban and beard for a good 20 years. And then I started wearing a turban again in 1996, 97.
After your marriage?
After my marriage.
Okay.
And although it had nothing to do with my wife, I mean, she was silent on the subject. My parents were silent on the subject. And I will share with you, I know we're running out of time. I actually had a dream in which Baba Nand Singh appeared to me and said, you've got to wear your turban and beard and become a Khalsa and connect with Guru Nanak. So you're absolutely right. I've been very blessed with meeting some remarkable people in my life. I didn't mention the fact that when I was in Delhi, a lot of the leading Raggis there were good buddies with me. I somehow managed, even though I'm tone deaf, you know, people like Dharam Singh Zakhmi, Bhai Santa Singh, you know, Surjan Singh, who didn't live far from my house. I had their company. Even here, you know, my squash coach, Hashim Khan, as far as I'm concerned, is an absolute Gurmukh. So yes, and there have been a whole lot of Gurmukhs on this side of the house who are not Sikhs, but who are Americans here, and I've had the good fortune of encountering them. But more than that, you know, I've encountered a lot of Gurmukhs through their writings, and some other day we'll talk about that.
Very good, very good. Very interested to share your views. But I think everything in your life, more or less, I can say only because my hobby is reading all the religious books, and Guru Granth Sahib, of course, much more. Very much based on Guru Granth Sahib. You never forget, say, जो दिसे गुर सिखड़ा तिसे निवृत्त लागा पाउजियो हुन आँखां बिरथा जी की गुर सज्जन देव मलाई जियो. So we don't have to stop there. It's very lucky when you meet a saintly person. Or doesn't matter from what religion they are even.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are yearning to go higher and higher. You don't stop there.
Absolutely.
That's the name of the game. This is what I figured out from the Guru Granth Sahib.
Yes.
We go to one school, then we go to another school for higher education, then another one to do PhD, then get a job and enjoy your life.
Haji.
Sorry to say last comment. Say every great person there's a woman behind. So I think the credit goes to your wife, even if she didn't say nothing to you, because internal vibrations are more powerful. Like a bullet coming from the cannon or from the banduk is more powerful than you throw a bullet by hands on somebody.
Yeah.
Silence works very, very.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I do tell people that my wife is my biggest guru.
See?
Just being around me, she's taught me, I mean, among other things, to behave myself. So that's not a bad thing. But yes, absolutely. And I will leave all of you with one last thought. It just occurred to me. Some things are very constant. I remember when I was about 11 or 12 years old, my desire in life was to be the embodiment of unconditional love. And I still hold that desire. Fatehji, thank you.
Thank you, Virji.
For listening to me.
Thank you, Virji.
Thanks for sharing, Ji.
Thank you. Virji Fateh.